If you ever see a lighthouse with its lights still burning, even though it was decommissioned 40 years ago, do not go near it, because someone is still keeping that flame alive, and he has been dead for a very long time. My name does not matter, but what happened to me on the cold, rocky coast of Maine will stay with me until the day I die, and maybe even after that, because now I understand that some jobs never really end, not even when the person doing them is gone. It started with an advertisement in a small, local newspaper, the kind nobody reads anymore except desperate people looking for desperate work. And I was desperate. The pay was strange, almost insulting for a month of isolation, but the description said only one thing that caught my eye. Previous keepers' whereabouts, unknown, must be comfortable with solitude and old machinery. I called the number, and a woman with a tired voice told me the lighthouse was called Blackwater Point, built in 1862, and that the last keeper, a man named Elias Thorne, had vanished one winter night without a trace, leaving behind his boots by the door and his coffee still warm on the stove. Nobody ever found him. No body, no note, nothing. The Coast Guard investigated for 2 weeks and then quietly closed the file, calling it a probable accident. A man swept away by a rogue wave while checking the rocks below. I did not believe in ghosts back then, so none of this scared me. It only made the job sound interesting, a little mystery, to keep me company through a lonely month. I arrived on a grey afternoon in October, the ferry dropping me at a splintered dock, while the pilot refused to even step onto the island, muttering something about how the light still turns on, some nights even with the power disconnected, and how the older fishermen in town never sail past Blackwater Point after dark, not for any price. I laughed it off as local superstition, the kind every small coastal town seems to have, and I climbed the 210 steps to the lantern room, feeling only the ache in my legs and the salt wind against my face. The lighthouse itself was beautiful in a haunting way. White paint, peeling like old skin, iron railings rusted the color of dried blood, and a great glass lens at the top that still caught the last of the daylight like a captured star. My job was simple. Log the weather every 4 hours, keep the automated systems maintained, and report anything unusual to the mainland by radio. For the first 3 days, nothing unusual happened at all. I read books, cooked simple meals, listened to the waves crash against the rocks 200 feet below, and told myself this was the most peaceful month of my life. Then on the 4th night, I woke up at exactly 3:17 in the morning to the sound of footsteps climbing the spiral staircase beneath my bedroom. Slow, deliberate, heavy boots on iron steps, one after another, getting closer. I sat frozen in my bed, telling myself it was just the building settling, old metal contracting in the cold. But the footsteps did not stop. They climbed past my floor and continued upward toward the lantern room, where the great light was supposed to be dark and disconnected. I heard a metallic click, and then, impossibly, a golden glow spilled down the stairwell, the beam of the lighthouse sweeping across the black ocean outside my window, rotating exactly the way it had for over a century, guiding ships that no longer needed guiding. I ran upstairs with my heart slamming against my ribs, and when I reached the lantern room, the light was on, spinning perfectly, the old gears turning smoothly despite being disconnected from any power source for 4 decades, and the room was empty, completely empty, except for a single wet footprint on the floor, as if someone had just stepped out of the sea and walked straight up 210 stairs. I radioed the mainland immediately, my voice shaking, and the woman with the tired voice simply said, "That happens sometimes. Just log it and go back to bed." As if this were the most normal thing in the world. I did not sleep again that night, or the next, and every night after that, the footsteps returned, always at 3:17, always climbing, always followed by that impossible golden light sweeping across the water. On the 7th night, I decided I would wait at the bottom of the staircase and confront whatever this was, because the not knowing was worse than any fear I could imagine. At 3:17 exactly, the temperature in the stairwell dropped so suddenly that my breath turned to fog in front of my face, and I heard the first footstep land just above me. Then another, and I looked up into the darkness and saw him, a tall, thin figure in an old oilskin coat, soaked through as if he had just been pulled from the ocean. Seaweed tangled around his boots. His face turned away from me, always turned away, as if he could not bear to let me see what remained of it. I could not move. I could not speak. I could only watch as he climbed past me without acknowledging my presence at all. Water dripping from his coat onto the iron steps, and the smell of brine and something rotten filling the narrow stairwell. He reached the lantern room, and the light came on, and through the small window in the stairwell, I watched his silhouette standing perfectly still beside the rotating beam, forever performing his final duty, forever keeping ships safe from the rocks that had killed him. I finally found the courage to speak, and I asked him, in a whisper that barely left my throat, "What happened to you?" And for the first time, he turned his head toward me, and though I could not see his face clearly in the dim light, I felt something press into my mind, like a memory that was not my own, a memory of a storm in 1894, of a ship called the Margaret breaking apart on the rocks below, of Elias Thorne climbing down the cliffside in the middle of the night to try to save the drowning sailors, of a wave larger than any before it, pulling him under while he screamed for help that never came, of his body being dragged out to sea while his lighthouse continued burning above him, abandoned, its duty unfinished. He had died trying to save others, and somehow, some part of him had refused to accept that his watch was over, refused to let the light go dark even in death. And every keeper who came after him, every single one who lasted more than a few nights, eventually vanished too. Not because the ghost was cruel, but because he was lonely, and because he believed, in whatever twisted way the dead believe things, that he needed a companion to help him finish a shift that could never truly end. I understood then why the previous keeper's boots had been left by the door, why his coffee had still been warm. He had not run away, and he had not fallen into the sea by accident. He had walked up those same 210 stairs one night, and simply never come back down, joining Elias Thorne in an endless vigil over ships that no longer sailed these waters. Before I fled that lantern room, something else happened that I have never told anyone until now. Something that still wakes me up, gasping in the middle of the night. As his silhouette stood beside the great spinning light, I noticed the logbook on the small wooden desk in the corner. The same logbook I had been using to record the weather every 4 hours. Except now it was open to a page dated decades before I was even born. The ink faded, but still legible in the strange golden glow. The handwriting was neat and careful, the handwriting of a man who took pride in his work. And the final entry read simply, "Storm worsening. Ship in distress near the North Rocks. Going down to help. God keep this light burning until I return." Beneath that entry, in different ink, in a hand that looked hurried and frightened, someone else had written, "Keeper missing since last night. Light still operating. Cannot explain." And beneath that, in yet another hand, another date. Decades later, another name, another keeper, another set of words trailing off into nothing. Page after page, keeper after keeper, each one lasting a few weeks before their entries simply stopped, mid-sentence sometimes, as if the pen had been lifted and never set down again. And I realized with a horror that settled deep into my bones that I was looking at a chain of men and women stretching back over 100 years, all of them swallowed by the same duty, all of them keeping the same impossible light alive long after they should have gone home. I wanted to close that book and never look at it again, but something made me flip forward, past the blank pages, to where my own handwriting should have been, my own weather logs from the past week. And there, written in ink I did not recognize as my own, in a hand shaky and unfamiliar, was a single line dated for that very night, the night I was standing in that room, the night I had not yet written a single word in that logbook. It said, "He asked me to stay and I think I might." I do not know who wrote it, or when, or how, but I understood in that moment that the lighthouse itself was not just haunted by Elias Thorne. It was hungry, patient, collecting keepers the way a spider collects flies in a web spun from grief and duty, and the terrible loneliness of an unfinished task. And I understood that if I stayed even one more night, my own name would join that endless list. My own voice would fade into whatever chorus of drowned men called out from the rocks below every time the storm rolled in. I slammed the logbook shut, and for the first time since I had arrived on that island, I heard something that almost sounded like a sigh, low and mournful, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. The sound of a man who had hoped, just for a moment, that he had finally found someone willing to share his endless watch, and who now understood that he would be alone again for a little while longer. I spent the rest of that night packing my things in the dark, refusing to look at the staircase, refusing to acknowledge the wet footprints that now seemed to be everywhere, leading from the lantern room down to my bedroom door, as if he had been visiting me while I slept, and I had simply never noticed. At dawn, I radioed for the ferry and told them I was leaving, job or no job, money or no money, and the pilot who arrived looked at me with a strange kind of understanding, the look of a man who had seen other keepers leave the same way, pale and shaking, refusing to explain what they had seen. As the boat pulled away from Blackwater Point, I turned back one last time and saw the lighthouse standing against the grey morning sky. And for just a moment, in the window of the lantern room, I saw him standing there, watching me go, his hand raised not in a wave, but as if reaching toward the boat, toward company, toward anyone willing to stay. I never went back, and I never took another job like that again. But sometimes, late at night when the wind is just right, I swear I can still hear footsteps climbing a staircase that does not exist in my house, slow and heavy, always stopping at exactly 3:17. And I wonder if some part of Elias Thorne followed me home, or if he is simply waiting patiently, the way lighthouse keepers always do, for the next person foolish enough to answer that advertisement. The next person who will climb those 210 stairs into the dark and never come back down. If this story gave you chills, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel for more terrifying tales, because the next lighthouse might be closer than you think.